Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. It's great that we have International Women's Day and that we recognize um, that we still have some work to do. Um, I carpool, and we've been talking during our journeys in about this. And this poster campaign from the UK actually came up because bias is which is the theme of International Women's Day this year, break the bias, is a really difficult thing to think about and to really confront, because it's kind of like bullying. It's invisible a lot of the time. And I thought this campaign did a great job of trying to articulate how bias is actually something that's really built into us in our perceptions, in social conditioning, and that makes it hard to break. And the first step of breaking that bias is recognizing it. So that's what we're going to talk about today. In the conversations that I've had with the amazing panel that we have here today, we've really walked around this topic, and I've found that I've learned a lot about the different types of bias that I didn't necessarily know existed. Which means I'm going to be a lot more aware of them from now on. And my hope is that by the end of this webinar, you are too, because I think that's a first step of trying to make a change. So let me tell you about the panel. The thing that is so amazing about our industry are the incredible people, and this panel is no exception. There's lots of intersection points. So we have Adria, am I saying that right? I now have that anxiety. I'm getting it wrong.
Oh, that's all right. Everybody says it differently. So Adria, as long as it doesn't have an N in it, we're good.
She's the chief. She leads operations for Meow Wolf, an incredible artist collective that's really brought a new type of attraction to space to our industry. She started her career in Disney, in parades and the character department, and then transitioned into live theatre. And her career has been truly international, from Taiwan to the Netherlands, India to the USA. Her real passion is around ADA. And there's a quote from when we had a conversation I want to read you that says, "Everyone brings beauty to the world, and we shouldn't be judging people on what they represent, but what their unique gift is. We can listen, learn, and open our perspective by doing that." And I thought those were really quite moving and very wise words to open up with. So thank you. Sharon, who we have from Six Flags. Sharon leads sales and marketing for Six Flags over Texas. She started her career as a news reporter on TV, which is probably the most glamorous of any of us. But she is very used to being in front of the camera. And as her career transitioned from being on TV into the sort of the PR space for attractions, she'd actually made that break when she became pregnant, and when she interviewed with Six Flags was pregnant at the time, but didn't want to disclose that during the interview process. And I think it says something wonderful about Six Flags that in the final interview, where she's like, "I need to tell you, by the way, I'm pregnant," they said to her, "Why would you hide that?" And I think that is goes to the parental bias that we're going to talk about, and how organizations need to recognize that parenting doesn't detract from your ability to do your job, as Sharon has definitely demonstrated with her many years at Six Flags. Michael. Michael is our representative male on the panel. Thank you for being brave, Michael. He's a senior executive who really works in the technology space in our attractions industry, and has experienced bias himself as an LGBTQ person, so really appreciates the power of advocacy and the importance of having allies on our journey. His story is as interesting as everyone else's. He started also with Disney, but in the tree farm, which I found, I didn't even know Disney had a tree farm, but was really instrumental in sort of the grassroots delivery. He went from there to to delivering the first automated ticketing system to Walt Disney, which then was integrated into their hotel system. And that experience of implementing technology and attractions took him to Carnival, where he was responsible for leading the implementation of the Ocean Medallion, which debuted at CES in 2017. And for the last few years, he's been with Aristocrat. And last but not least, from Gateway is Lena. Lena is one of the senior managers within the technology side. And Lena was telling me that her first job was as a secretary because that's what women did. But she understood databases. She'd grown up with sort of IT and sort of but in her family, and she was comfortable with it, and these old guys weren't. And that sort of eased her into IT project management. She's implemented large HRIS projects within healthcare. She joined Gateway 15 years ago and has a double life where she's also the artistic director of Steel River Playhouse. So she and Adria have that sort of artistic thing in common as well. So welcome, panelists. Thank you so much. Let's kick off the discussion where there are many different types of bias. So if I run through them very quickly, we have performance bias, attribution bias, likability bias, parental bias, affinity bias, and then intersectionality, which is when numerous biases overlay each other. So there's a lot to talk about today, and we'll try and rattle through it. I thought a good place to start is affinity bias, which in some ways is the one that we probably understand most, that there is a tendency to hire in your own likeness, to relate to people who are like you. Human nature kind of gravitates to us sharing that common ground. And when I look at the marketing team that I have in WhiteWater, of which I'm very proud, I see it is quite strongly female. Now, is that because marketing tends to be a very female space, or is that because I am in my own way demonstrating bias? Who wants to kick off on this? Sharon, what are your experiences? You lead sales and marketing.
Yes. So it's interesting that you pinged me first for this question, but I will jump right in. So if you look at the makeup of my team, it is more women. There are more women than there are males, but I think when you look at the overall makeup, there is good diversity. Um, I actually challenge myself when you're looking at those final candidates who are the best ones for the position to look at it from a whole rounded situation. And that is something that, you kind of pull up from and you see, I really gravitated to this person. What were the reasons? And making sure that those reasons are that you can defend those and make sure that it's not just because they look like me, just because they respond in the same way that I do. Sometimes I will challenge myself on the person who, during the interview process, may have answered something drastically different from what I would have perceived, to kind of step back and say, am I looking at this from a personal point of view or a professional point of view? And from the professional perspective, you have to respect the fact that everyone's lens is different. And having that person in the room is probably what I need more than the person who's going to nod and agree with me. I think if we can do a better job of doing that on a regular basis, it would probably help everyone have a seat at the table.
Adria, I know that you are a real advocate for seeing more diversity and inclusion in the types of people that work in the Owl Wolf. How do you achieve that?
Well, it's a challenging process for sure. I think one of the things in this industry, I've been in this industry for a very, 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 very long time, and you've seen change happen over the course of it, but there's still certain elements that have remained static, in part because of how the industry is built. So if we're looking for things like we're looking for roles like senior leadership. Very often those skill sets happen to be held by white males. That's kind of the way the industry has grown from the beginning. But now we have an opportunity to start developing those middle managers, start finding people with translatable skills and transferable skills and coaching them and growing them into positions that will allow them to move up in an organization and take on those chief operating roles and take on those general manager roles. But it's our responsibility to identify those individuals and then cultivate and create programming that will allow them to grow and have that opportunity. And it's not about even just keeping them within our organization. It's about giving them the wings to be able to expand, perhaps even beyond what our individual businesses are able to provide for them. So I think that's something that we really need to be looking at right now, and not limiting ourselves either in terms of what a person may appear to be bringing to the table, but digging a little bit deeper and looking at things like what skills do they have beyond what might be on a black and white resume? What do they bring to the table in terms of being a human? What are their skills? What are the things that maybe they've done outside of the realm of work that will actually be beneficial down the road? It gives us a bigger pool of candidates to draw from, and certainly gives us a better eye view of what's going on as a whole throughout our industry and throughout the world, and certainly elevating the guest experience, because everybody wants to see somebody that looks like them when they walk through the door.
That's so important, isn't it? That we do that to welcome people.
It's hard. It's not easy. It takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of effort, but I personally believe that it is such a valuable investment that goes beyond budgetary consideration. It goes into growth, and it goes into creating a better population of industry professionals.
Lena, in Gateway, do you have a process that tries to remove some of the biases out of your recruitment process?
That's really an excellent question that I don't necessarily have a huge insight into, although I know that our current HR director, who happens to be here, is incredibly committed to this. So what process was there, I am sure, is being looked at and improved as we move forward. I think it's really interesting. I've been reading, obviously, quite a lot about this, and we've talked about this before, bringing this back to women in the workplace, how very often men are hired on potential and women are hired on achievement. And I think that's really a super critical bias to look at because, well, for obvious reasons. I mean, as we are growing women to move into these senior positions, that Adria very succinctly pointed out that it's white men that are currently qualified for a lot of these jobs because they've had all the opportunities in the past, right? So let's make sure that we're really looking at the potential. Let's make sure that we're really looking at the holistic person. The fact you mentioned my double life in the theater, it brings a lot to the table for Gateway. Absolutely. And they've been incredibly supportive of that. They know that I have this whole other life, and it has done nothing but bring advantages to Gateway. And I think that's something that really needs to be looked at for sure. Hiring.
Well, that's a beautiful segue into a different type of bias, which is performance bias. And performance bias is this idea that we tend to judge men more favorably. So women are hired on past performance, and men are hired on potential. He has the potential to do this, whereas women are like, well, have they done this? Do we know they can do it?
Right.
And I think that really does hold women back. But I think there's also an element of women holding themselves back, because apparently men will pitch in and apply for a job they're only 60% qualified for. Whereas women, they want to be much more confident, and I need to have done this. So I feel like there's something that we need to do on ourselves to recognize you don't have to be an expert in everything. You're going to grow into a space and have a little bit more confidence. Michael, it seems harsh to kind of say the guy in the room, but what experience do you have about that idea of sort of performance bias, and the fact that often the room is full of, because of the opportunities and some of those biases, guys around you, and how have you tried to equal that balance and be an advocate? Oh, you're on mute. First one.
I was thinking about that this morning, even at the gym, while mulling over things that we might talk about today. But I think bias can operate in reverse as well. And I think I've got Sheryl Sandberg's book, Lean In, there in the background, and I found that so inspiring. But she talks a lot about encouraging, the title of the book, for women to lean in, to ensure that in those environments where culturally, maybe even in the unspoken expectations, as Una alluded, that women within the work environment find that their peers, maybe their superiors, have unspoken expectations for contribution, for setting the limits, for the requirements of a job that are unequally oftentimes applied. And I love that in one of the chapters where Sheryl talks about women with home care needs. Specifically in one of the areas, she's talking about women who need to have their children in a daycare, and where the balance of the cost of the daycare becomes like an equalizer against their own wage. But her encouragement is to lean in and to ensure that every moment you have the ability to command the decisions until the time that a decision has to be made. And I think, so from the woman employee's perspective, I think that's important. But then, I love that Una introduced the notion of ally and advocate. And I thought about that this morning too, is that, we all need allies. But ally is kind of a passive term, or it can be a passive term. You need allies who are advocates. An advocate is an active term in my mind, which means that that person is going to speak for you when maybe others are not allowing you to speak, to create an opening for you when otherwise you can't find an opening, and then to advocate for you when you're not present. And I think that's what gives me such passion about being here today, being in this forum of incredible women leaders, and sharing in this discussion, because I think that's the way we change.
I agree wholeheartedly, Michael. Maria, great to see you. You've got a question. Do you want to come off mute and ask a question?
Yes, so I'm wondering how much also bias comes from us, because we've lived in that society of being around that bias, and maybe we as women don't believe in ourselves and we don't project that, whereas men haven't gone through that, so they go in a lot more confident than a woman would. And that's partly just because of the way it's set up, just the way it works, right?
Yeah.
So we have to start believing and releasing that in ourselves. I think that's just,
I would love to respond to that.
Yes, please.
I can speak to just my current role. I've been in this position for a couple of years now, but when I first started with this company, I never imagined that someone like me would have this opportunity. And it's not just because of, the fact that I did just PR. It was just the fact that I cut myself short because I didn't feel as if I had as much experience as the other people before me, that I would not have the thought process that they had. And ironically, those people that were in the role before me were white males. But I think you bring up a very valid point. There were others that brought it to my attention that I could own this role just as much as anyone else who was currently in this role. And once they brought it to my attention, then I started looking at myself in a different lens. And I did that compare and contrast. And I was like, well, I may not rattle off numbers the same way that someone else may, but I know who to go to. I know what that resource is. And I think that's something we have to keep in mind is we don't have to have all the answers, but knowing who the resource is, that is just as powerful. But I think the other side of that is there's still that mindset that it's still pushing us to almost go down that avenue. And I have a real life comparison that recently happened to me. It was a very innocent dialogue, but I was catching up with a friend and they were asking about different colleagues, some who are at the same title level as myself. And they said, you know, if you keep it up, you'll be just as good as XYZ, while the only difference between us was tenure versus ability. And the person that they were comparing me to was a male versus me being a female. And I don't think that they had the intent of inferring that because of, you know, who I was and my years made it seem as if I was not as qualified. But the translation to me was I didn't have the tenure. I'm not the male. Therefore, you think I still have work to do. But my ability is just as strong as that person's. So I think that it's a two-way street, and we now need to be more proactive at redirecting that conversation and also giving ourselves some grace. And like you said, Myra, allowing us to see our ability from the onset versus letting other people tell our narrative.
So that type of bias is called attribution bias, and it's about the credibility gap that is perceived between male and female. How many people in here have been talked over in a meeting by a man? It's three times more likely to happen to a woman than it is to a man. Now, that's not to say it doesn't happen to men too. I mean, I've been in plenty of meetings where everyone wants to get their opinion on the table. But the fact that we maybe have to work a little harder to make sure that our voice is heard, and need those allies, have someone who like, oh no, hang on, let's give this person a space to speak. Lena, do you have experience of that? But I imagine there's a lot of guys in IT with you. Oh, you're on mute now.
Absolutely. And because I've been in IT in one way or another since I started my career a bazillion years ago, it has definitely, I've seen a difference. But as I said, I've been in at Gateway for about 15 years, and even at Gateway, I've seen a real difference. I think I shared in one of our pre-meetings is I work on a team until about 3 years ago, whenever Ali joined us, that was all men, a leadership team that was all men. And it's really interesting how this group has grown. Very early on, I was talked over a lot. But I have to say, this group of men has been incredibly receptive to my constant cries of feminism. And they have really, really become allies, and many of them are advocates too for not only me but other women in the group. And I think that really speaks to that there are many people and men just need to really understand what's happening. The bias isn't malevolent, it's just systemic, right? So I think it's just a matter of making people aware that it's happening, and as soon as they become aware, they're like, oh wow, you're right. And then they learn and grow and change. And I think it's really indicative of the group that I work with now. I trust them implicitly, and I don't, if they talk over me, it's because I talked over them. It has nothing to do with our gender at all.
Now, Michael, I know that you take this advocacy quite personally, and have used that in your. Can you give us some examples in recently?
And I think this digital connection world, whether it's Teams or Zoom, is a great example of that in the new world. I started at Aristocrat the very week that everybody transitioned to home during the pandemic. And, so the only way I could meet anybody was through Zoom. And I had a female vice president that reported to me, and then a senior director in India who were two of the most senior women in my technology team. And the senior director in India never turned on her video and only had her initials. And then my VP was always in the lower part of the screen with a background on. And so I began encouraging them to seize the presence of their square and to occupy powerfully the view. And a lot of that was, just by a suggestion in the chat of the meeting. Hey, why don't you turn on your camera and, offer this comment? And then praise when they began to do it. And then in one-on-one discussions, talking about how their background, how their positioning within the square gives them a greater presence. And with both of them, now they're powerful women within the dialogue. Whereas before, I think, they tended to be allowing the dialogue to proceed, even though they had significant amount to contribute as leaders within the organization. And so I think even in this new world, that's one great example for commanding presence. And then as an advocate, I think finding your allies, finding your advocates who know your talents and can also then offer you, hey, within the dialogue, that, hey, I know Adria's got something really great to say about this. Adria, why don't you take it from there? And transitioning. I think that's
Which is great, Adria. Let's do that.
Well, it's interesting, when we listen, we talk about attribution bias, we talk about affinity bias, we talk about these different things. And I feel like I was really fortunate growing up. I have 3 younger brothers. And so I kind of grew up with a mindset before ADA was in the world, before Title IX was in the world. That's when I grew up. And my parents were great advocates in saying, get out there and just do what you want to do, what you need to do. And I did, and I failed a lot, but it taught me a lot. And part of, I think, what it taught me was really appreciating people for who they are. And so taking that and then molding it into my career, using it as a model to mentor, to be mentored, to speak out for individuals that other people might overlook, for job possibilities or opportunities, has become really a core to my belief system and my work ethic. And that's what I try and share with the individuals that I work with, and modeling it and teaching them how to do it and making it visible, because we can talk all we want, but the key to that is actually being action oriented. And it's important to make sure that if we are advocating for different populations, for different individuals, even if we're advocating for somebody perhaps, and this is going to sound really off the rails, but if we're advocating for, let's say, that white Caucasian male in a leadership role, that we are advocating because they're the right person for that role. They bring in the right experience, they have the right sensibilities, they have the right sensitivities and the right background and the right open-heartedness to support whatever the initiative is for the organization that's hiring. So, and that's hard, because every day you look at somebody that walks in wearing a t-shirt that perhaps you like or you don't like, and you instantly have a response to them. Recognizing that in yourself is the first step, and then being able to share with other people how to recognize that in themselves and learn how to move away from it is really important. The other thing is to understand people that you don't understand, and take the time to talk with them and learn more about why they think this way. It doesn't mean you agree with them. You can respectfully agree to disagree, but that knowledge gives you more information to be able to move forward in a positive manner and to be able to more efficiently look to a whole variety of people that you could perhaps bring into your organization or into your life that's going to make it richer and more beneficial for everybody.
Wouldn't the world be a better place if we were just a little less polarized and did that?
That might be too easy, right?
Then amen to that, for sure.
Yeah. So sorry, Sharon.
I was just concurring to what you were saying, but I think that Michael mentioned one thing in regards to just the day and age in which we are living in this virtual box. There's another side to that too, and I know it was on the topic to get into, but it's the parental side of it. For many of us who are working from home and are having to tend to not only the professional side, but also the parental side as well. You tend to feel a little bit like, oh no, I can't acknowledge this side of my life. I need to make sure that I stay within my box, right? And so just making sure that you feel comfortable in owning that space that you're in. This is my life, and I'm just as capable of multitasking not only my job but my personal life as well. And you get to know a little bit more about me. My kids are crazy just like me, so but I think that we don't need to apologize for that. And I had to catch myself early on in apologizing for, my daughter who has an affinity to the camera and would find her way into the screen inching slowly but surely.
It's
And
not her fault. It's how you started too.
yes, well, it runs in the family, I guess. But, I think as women, we tend to apologize for it. And we were talking about it earlier when we were going through all of this. And Steve, ironically, had his daughter walking behind him at the time. And he didn't, think anything of it. And I said, that's the prime example of we instinctually say, I'm sorry. And, the guy may say, nothing to see here, carry on, not discounting your your affection towards your daughter, Steve, but I just think that that's just the difference between a female approach versus the male approach.
I have two kids, and they are I think they're well known now by my team on a first name basis. And I actually think that this move to this digital format over the last 2 years has been a good thing, because we do see more of the real life, the behind, that life isn't just in the office, it's everything. And maybe that's going to have helped to move things forward in its own way, because if we own these spaces, we own these squares. Michael, do you have any experiences in this? Or Lena, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, Lena, I'll start first. But one of the biggest power alleys that I have identified is creating teams that are diverse in many ways. And I think what you're just talking about, Una, plays into that phenomenally. And I know that not all leaders believe this, not all organizations believe this. But I believe that creating a collaborative, diverse team will lead to the very best outcomes, from product design to guest service to problem solving. And in the state of many work cultures where the complexion of the team, the culture of the team is built or historically has a foundation around more male-centric mores, male-centric activities, male-centric thought processes, then it becomes important to ensure that the diversity of the team begins to round out that complexion, and that leaders are courageous in ensuring that all of those cultural foundations have an opportunity to be questioned. And as we were just talking, you were talking just a second ago, Una, about the opportunity for us to think more broadly, especially about, as Sharon was saying, the needs of a person, because bringing the whole person to work is that contribution that makes the power alley possible. And I've seen male leaders have no problem saying, "Hey, I'm going to take my dog to the doctor. I'm going out to meet the workmen in the front yard. I'll be back in a minute," without thinking a thing about it. Well, that's fine. That's good. But all the other members of the team should have the exact same benefit of being respected for the balance of their life that they bring as contributions and as whole people to their role that they play as well.
I do think, though, parenting, especially when you have young children, has been shown to slow down mostly women's careers. And what's great to see, and I'd like to give a shout out to Canada, because we do a much better job of paternity and maternity leave than the US does. And I know that we have some people from Europe who also have generous maternity and paternity terms. But that idea that, especially in the early years, the flexibility that you need, and as you said, Michael, in the beginning about childcare costs, when you were talking about lean in, there are things that we need to do in organizations to make sure that we bring that talent back to work. So many mothers leave work for a period of years and then find it hard to get back in. Do any of our panel want to jump in on this and how we make the workplace a better workplace for parents in general, not just for mothers, but it has historically tended to be mothers? Adria?
I would say that, you know, interestingly enough, with it being International Women's Day yesterday, the movie 9 to 5 was on. And my mother, who happens to live with us, and that's another component that has become more and more interesting as we move forward, is elder care, is they were talking about things that they were doing at that time in the context of this movie to try and make it better for women in particular working in that environment, which included things like creating a child care center and doing flex work, and I think job sharing and all those elements. And I think those still hold true, a lot of that. And I think being able to have capacity to be able to initiate some of those programs, if the company is able to handle it, is phenomenal. If the company isn't able to support it from a budgetary consideration, and that's a reality too that we have to look at, it's resourcing in your community. Check in your community and see what kind of resources are available, and then share those out with your team members so your team members know that they have support on some level. There are communities that offer things like elder care programs or child care programs or drop-off services, pickup services, any variety of things that could be investigated to help support the team. It's not always about the company itself providing all of these initiatives. Sometimes it's about somebody just rolling up their sleeves and doing a little bit of elbow greasing to dig into what's available and provide it and just create that networking, those connections. And I've seen that work really successfully. Some work I did in Louisiana, that was one of the things that kind of kicked us over the edge in terms of being one of the top employers, was our being able to connect people to resources.
Una, if I could, I would like to just kind of weigh in on the perspective from being able to work at Six Flags. I actually had both of my children while working here, and I've seen firsthand just the ability to have that work-life balance in terms of being able to incorporate the kids. I think I have to quantify work-life balance goes in waves, roller coasters. But when my kids were young, there were situations where I had no choice. My husband was on shift. I had my kids, something came up, and my kids came to work with me. I was never, shamed for that. It was always a bit of a relief. But I do appreciate having an environment where I was able to do that and not feel as if it was going to be held against me. So there were times when I'm doing an interview with a reporter and also have my kid over in a stroller who I'm praying doesn't throw their sippy cup in the middle of the interview. But, it's one of those things where you need to do your research and make sure that the environment that you're in does incorporate your ability to stick to your personal beliefs as well. And I think some of that is on us. We can very easily and call out the side of the employer, but we also need to, I think, be diligent and also our advocate when it comes to the ideal work environment that we want to be in, because the reality is that we're here at work more than we are at home. And whether we say that we can truly separate it or not, the worlds do blend. So you just want to make sure that you can stay whole no matter which side you're on.
I think that there's also something that we are doing as role models, as mothers in the workplace, as carers in the workplace, to show how we manage the flexibility. And I think we talk about work-life balance, and the key word there is balance. It's not one side and another side. They, for me at least, they combine. And my kids see me doing my job, and I think and I do have two daughters, which is perhaps partly why I'm so passionate about this. But they see me in a role that is senior, and I think it changes perspectives that this is totally achievable for them. This is normal, and we normalize working and parenting or caring. But we have to be role models, and we have to show the way. And I think particularly as leaders, trying to create environments that are flexible, that enable you to pick up your kid at 3 and come back online, to not feel bad about doing that run to sort of guides or brownies or whatever. That's okay. And making that environment where people feel safe to do what they need to do. One of the areas that we haven't talked about at all, which I think is a really challenging one, and let's dig into it a little bit, is likability bias, which I thought was an interesting one when I was researching a bit. And this is about this idea that a man is confident and a woman is arrogant. And it goes back to, I think, was it Lena who was talking about sort of social norms and expectations of what it is to be a woman and what are female characteristics, and how when a woman doesn't fit those sort of typical characteristics, it kind of jars, and that maybe holds them back a little bit. And the way they're judged is not the same as the way a man is judged. Do any of you want to jump in on this idea of likability bias?
I can talk a little bit about this. As I said, I've been working in IT since the probably early to mid 90s, really. And on more than one occasion, and this is prior to Gateway, to be fair, but on more than one occasion, I have been taken to task, if you will, by my boss for being too emotional or too passionate. Or I need to listen more. And it's really interesting because all of these are codified for your taking up too much space. And, as I said, because I started in the 90s, it was a lot different than it is. It's actually already gotten a lot better. But I think women are often encouraged not to take up space, or certainly I have been encouraged not to take up space. And fortunately for me, I was raised by a woman that told me that that wasn't right. So I then took up more space typically. And it didn't always, frankly, work out for me professionally. I know that I have lost certainly promotion opportunities, and at one point a job, because I was clearly just taking up too much space.
I think, Adria, haven't you had a similar experience? Oh, you're on mute.
I beat it. I beat the you're on mute call. Yeah, I actually was up for a position as a CEO for an organization. Actually, it was a 501c3, and had phenomenal interviews all the way down. And I got to the last interview with the board of directors, which interestingly enough happened to be primarily men. But as we were talking about different things, I got very passionate about this particular organization and what it could bring to the table. and was sharing, you know, some of my core beliefs and thoughts. Nothing that was brand new through the course of the interview, but certainly perhaps a little bit more demonstrative in this situation, given the people face to face. And so about a week later, I got a contact back from their recruiter telling me that I had not gotten the position, that they really liked me across the board, and that they were going to have difficulty, you know, finding another candidate that had the same qualifications and the same experience, et cetera. And I said, so you're telling me basically that I was right for the job. So what happened? They're like, well, you were just a little too passionate about everything going on. I go, you mean, was I demonstrating vulnerability? Was I too? And the recruiter was like, I think you were just too much for them.
Yep. Taking up too much space.
Exactly.
Yep.
So that was it. And it did make me change a little bit of my direction when I was interviewing subsequently. I don't feel like I did anything wrong in the interview at all. And I think, you know, the organization had some trouble following, because I followed them. I had some trouble the next couple of years, and they actually weren't keeping anybody in position, and then kind of wound up moving the direction that I had wanted to take them anyway, which I thought was interesting. But you know, it's a great lesson internally for me to take away for myself, and also looking at other people that perhaps get very passionate in the confines of either a business meeting or even an interview process, is to give them the space to be able to do that.
I think that's a really good point, and it's a line that we often have to walk down, right? And you know, you want to be able to display your ability to weigh in on a certain topic, but you can't go too far, because if you go too far, then you know you're being too aggressive. And you know, I think sometimes I get faced with, you know, a double label, because it's the, you know, you got to be careful about being the angry Black female. And you don't want that to happen. And when you get labeled like that, then you not only are trying to combat that label, but you're also fighting to get your point across, which is just as valid as the other person who is also weighing in. So it gets exhausting. Remember, Lena, #exhausting. But it gets exhausting at times, because all we want to do is have a voice in the room, have a seat at the table. It's not that we're wanting to be more than one other person that is sitting next to us. We just want to have the same opportunity.
That's where I think it's important that, you know, strong advocates within the organization for the females within the organization, because somebody needs to stand up and say, when somebody's beginning to characterize some member of the team as, you know, an angry Black female, even in other words, you know, somebody needs to stand up who's not that person and say, not correct.
I totally agree. And I think one of the most hurtful things, and I feel like it is said to me as a compliment, but Sharon's nice, but don't get on her bad side. And it's like, Sharon's nice, but don't make her mad. But what makes my response any different than what Michael would say? Right. How is that different? It isn't. Is it because of Michael being who he is from an external standpoint? If it is my delivery, then let me know, and let's have, you know, let me pull up from that and learn from it. And I have had those learnings along the way. I'm not going to say that I was cheeseburgers and butterflies my entire life, but I do think that there have been sincere situations where I was truly labeled just because of that immediate bias that was set forth without even giving me a chance to really convey my message.
And that's the challenge, right? Trying to change somebody else's filter.
Exactly.
Because everyone comes from such a different place. Even twins. I mean, there's studies showing that twins do not have the same ideology. You know, one sees it from the left and one sees it from the right. And while they may be very similar in their beliefs, there's proven differences to that. And so that's part of the challenge too, right? Is remembering people are going to have biases when we're talking. and figuring out how to navigate that piece of it too, which seems like an extra lift, but right now that's part of the education too.
I think that it's been a great chat going on if anyone is watching it, and one of the questions that came up was about sons and how we have this ability to, it's not just about your daughters, it's about your sons too, and creating these spaces for people to see everyone's value and advocate equally for each other. And I think to do that you have to create teams where there is trust and candor, because you have to be able to call people out and say, I just, by the way, probably not in the meeting, but that might have come across this way. You know, because most thing with bias is people don't realize that they have it or that it's happening. And we have to be able to have conversations about, have you thought how that might have been perceived? I know that's probably not what you intended, but you have to have the strength to be able to do that. And that means you need to be creating trusting environments. Lena, Michael, have you got examples of that?
Lena, I took it first last time. You take it first.
I do. I think I referenced something like that earlier for sure. And I think this again speaks to advocating for yourself and others. And I think it's really important that we understand that bias almost never comes from a place of intentional exclusion, intentional unkindness. And if we keep an open mind about the fact that we all have bias and that we can all just be open to hear our own biases and advocate for ourselves and others to try to break down the biases that others have, it creates a really great trusting relationship. And you can do anything when you're in a trusting relationship. You know, if you have a group of people who really trust each other, that's the way to go. And I think we talked a lot about, we wanted to make sure that when we did this webinar, we were talking about things that we can do, actionable things, tools,
Yeah.
and we're doing a good job of that. And I think it's really important that we all take the time to really have an ear open for bias, not only in our own choices and behaviors, but also in those that we work with daily and live with daily. But I mean, this is in the context of our jobs. And so not, you know, I heard someone once say to me, it isn't really calling out. Let's get rid of this calling out thing. Let's call in. You know, when someone is behaving in a way that you feel a bias is just really present, just call them in. Let's talk about this. Can we look at this? I think it was Michael that just said, have you thought about how that may have been perceived? Or maybe it was Una, I'm sorry, I've forgotten. But how that what you're doing is being perceived, and can we try and really go back and look at that? Because as we've talked about many, many times, and is so critically important, having a diverse people at the table. And it's not just men and women or different races, it's different ages, it's different places that you grew up in the world. There's so many different ways to think about everything. And the most successful teams, the most successful companies are those that have the most viewpoints and are the most collaborative. Collaboration is the secret to success, in my opinion. So, and the best way to do that is to have lots and lots and lots of ideas around the table.
Well, that's a great segue into maybe a few kind of last points from each of the panelists. I recognize that on the East Coast, maybe this is people's lunchtime. In Europe, it's coming up for dinner time. So we should try and pull these ideas and these threads together. It would be great to sort of say like a couple of things that you think are really practical that people can do. And then maybe we can try and take a couple of questions if anyone wants to stay on the line after we've run out of our hour. Sharon, should we start with you? Can you give us some practical things that you're like, these would be my top tips?
Sure. Well, first I have to say thank you to my Sixplex family that's on right now. Many of them are on my direct team here in the office, and I hope that they can attest to the fact that I make sure that they feel empowered to own their space. And I think that, you know, we as women need to feel comfortable in our space, but also give ourselves grace and realize, not to sound too cliche, but realize that, you know, we are worthy of being at the table. We are worthy of being part of that conversation. So the next time that you have that apprehension of responding or of asking, you know, can I be part of XYZ? Go ahead and get past that uncomfortable feeling and put yourself in that position to be part of it, because you are worthy of doing that. That's something that, you know, I look at myself in the mirror. Yes, I do the motivational things, but I look at myself in the mirror and I say that I am a part of the process. Um, I am worthy of being in the space that I'm in. So walk into it. You know, I think when Lena said call in, you know, walk into where you are going in your life and don't be afraid and hold back.
Michael, what would you want to pieces of advice to leave everyone with?
Yeah, I want to echo back to your opening. Thank you for introducing, you know, the notion of, you know, my own dimension of diversity, being a gay leader, and always having found and appreciate advocates in my career. Those who speak up within the organization, who have helped me have a voice in environments where maybe I wouldn't have otherwise. And I think that's my wish for all of us, is not only to find advocates who can help us in our careers forward, but also to be advocates, even women for other women. You know, that's powerful as well. Women leaders advocating for women throughout the organization is huge, huge. So I think that would be my one thing, is the power of advocacy can never be undervalued. It is huge.
Adria, do you want to go next?
Sure. That's a lot to follow, Sharon and Michael. I'm glad I get to go before Lena. For me, it's about keeping the conversation going. Don't let this conversation drop. Don't let it get away from us. You know, it's fantastic that we have these months devoted to different things, you know, from an advocacy perspective, but we also sometimes have tendency to get hung up for a month on those particular topics, and then they dissipate and they go away. And this is something that has to be addressed daily. It has to be focused on. And the challenge is that a lot of times we don't have all the internal resources available to us to be able to manage that, especially if you're in a smaller organization. So my takeaway for everybody would be learn about other resources you have available to you. Don't feel like you have to shoulder this conversation on your own. Reach out to other people, reach out to community organizations, reach out to the people on this webinar right now. Say, hey, how do you handle this? What do you think of? And find ways that are actionable. Find things that just aren't conversation, but that can really, truly make a difference to the makeup of the people that you're bringing into your company and into your organization. You know, things like this allow us all to come together, and that in turn will allow us to thrive as human beings. So keep your humanity in check and use it to advocate for yourself and others.
Lena, you kicked this off with some good advice. I don't know if you have any more that you want to add.
I don't know how I could possibly top everyone that has already spoken, except the only thing that I would add that I'm not sure that I heard is to continue to challenge the leadership and the rest of the leadership in your organization, the executive leadership in the organization. It is a daily exercise, as was said before me, and it can't just be this day or this month or this week for women particularly, or, you know, it can't just be February for people of color, and it can't just be, there's so many ways that we need to advocate for so many different types of people. And I think it's important to continue to challenge our leaderships, because many times they say the right things, but they forget to actually do the right things. And that's what really counts, obviously.
Yeah, and I think encouraging things like really practical things like taking names off CVs so that there aren't those filters that happen. And, you know, there are some very small practical things we can encourage our organizations to do. I really think that I became a better leader when I became a parent. And what you do as a parent is try and create a space and give feedback and be caring and loving and role model the behaviors you want to see, reward what you want to see, and have conversations about the things you don't. And I think that idea that each of us needs to role model the behaviors that we want to see in our organizations to be leaders, to try, you can't get up every day and say, I'm going to be inspiring, but do your best and try to create these diverse, safe spaces. And I think that'll take us a long way. It's been a great discussion. We are now at 10:03. Are there any last questions that, Greg, that you think we should be picking up before we sign off?
We did have a question come in now. There was some conversation going on in the chat and we may have touched on it, but I just wanted to make sure. Kate asked, Michael, you talked earlier about wanting managers to create a diverse team. What is the best way to be an advocate for yourself to be on a project without seeming too passionate, pushy, etc.?
And I responded a little bit about the hiring panels for new people coming on board. So I appreciate the restatement of that, Greg, because Kate, I think, back to my point about advocacy, the pattern that I've found that's effective is establishing one leader within the organization who you believe you can tell your story to, who you can help, have them understand you in greater detail for what you bring to the table. And then through mentorship, maybe there's some tuning things that they would like to offer you, but certainly through their advocacy, understanding the value that you bring, the contribution that you would like to contribute, that's a great inroad. I don't think it's the be all and end all, but I think that that's one really effective tool that I've seen work phenomenally. Even back to those two women that I mentioned earlier, who within the past 2 years have made such incredible leaps forward with their presence and contribution at Aristocrat. So never underestimate just reaching out to somebody that you feel you have an opportunity to create a relationship with and have them as your advocate.
Awesome. Thank you so much for answering my question.
Isaac, you want to speak up?
Yeah, so I know this isn't quite related to the current topic, but there was that question I asked earlier. This was directed towards Una because she happens to work for a water slide company. So
yeah, it was about body positivity. It's an interesting comment. I think that what we try to do in water parks is create spaces where families come together and, families see each other in all sorts of shapes and forms. And we focus less on what do you look like and more about what are the experience we're creating. How are we creating an environment where people are sharing experiences, where people are just enjoying the joy of water? I think the fact you're in swimwear is kind of incidental. You happen to be, but it's not about the swimmer, it's about the experience, if that makes sense to you guys. Melanie, did you want to ask a question?
Yeah, I didn't have a question so much as I had there was a comment that somebody said to me in a completely different content yesterday that really seems to apply here, and it was whatever we tolerate, we encourage. And it just, as you guys were speaking, it just kept resounding in my head just over and over again, that whatever we tolerate, we encourage. And I think I'm going to write it down and have it stuck up because I think it really applies to the conversation, to this conversation very much. And I hadn't thought about it yesterday when it was a completely different topic, but I think it really, really applies here. So I just wanted to share that with everybody here and encourage others to keep that in their mind as well.
Melanie, I
Thank you.
love what you brought up. And one of the things that's been in my mind through this, it fits well with what you just said. You know, I've experienced where in Zoom meetings that the first several minutes are taken up by, you know, some testosterone discussions about cars and planes or muscles. But wouldn't it be great, you know, instead of just tolerating that a group of women attendees decide to join 4 minutes earlier and make sure that the entire early conversation is already going, and it's about something entirely different, you know, because it's a subtle way of not just tolerating and not then it, in effect, encouraging it, but maybe changing it a little bit.
Melanie, one of my friends, she just had to drop off. Her name is Katie, but she tag teamed on what you just stated and said, what you permit, you promote. And I think that statement, along with yours, really will resonate with me moving forward. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah, we have to be braver to have some hard conversations and call in.
Call in.
Call
That's
in.
right. Call
I'm
in.
going to remember that one. Okay, everyone. Well, thank you so much for joining us. This has been a great discussion. Please carry it forward into your organizations, into your lives. I think creating more diverse teams, recognizing bias in ourselves and helping others, and making some of these steps will definitely make a difference. So thanks for everyone who's given the time today to join us in this. And I think there's going to be a recording available. Greg, do you want to pick up and close us out?
Yes, so this has been recorded. We'll work on editing it and we'll get it out next week. It will be included in Gateway's newsletter if you happen to subscribe to that. But otherwise, I'll make sure we send it directly out to anyone who attended the webinar.
That's great. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, panel. Sharon, Michael, Lena, Adria, you've been great.